Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's panel discussion on engineering ethics in the age of digital advancement. My name is Matt Press, and I'm the Director of the Office of the New South Wales Building Commissioner. And before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend those acknowledgements to any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today electronically. Now, today we're not here to talk about ethics in construction for those doing philosophy. This is a discussion for constructors. And I'm joined here today by a very experienced panel of people who are actively involved in the built form, designers, engineers, and quantity surveyors. And they're here to talk to you about why ethics is important to what our industry does out there on the job site, and how changes in the way that construction is being regulated, how it's being financed, insured, and how it's being modernised mean that ethical decision-making and ethical business practice are going to become increasingly important for everyone involved in the design and construction of our buildings. So it's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists here today. First, we have Michael DeCarl. Michael is the founder and managing director of Construction Consultants. It's a business that provides quantity surveying and consulting services to many developers and builders across New South Wales. He's very experienced, over 23 years in the industry. He's also a member of the AIQS College of Expert Witnesses and is a member of various government panels set up to look at defects and building inspections. We also have Aggie Sterling. Aggie is an architect and the New South Wales president of the Association of Consulting Architects. She's also the national vice president of the same organisation. Aggie is a lady of many hats. She's a mother, a grandmother, a wife, and she also runs her own practice, Sterling Architects, which has been in business since 1999. She specialises now in residential projects, but through her career, she's done buildings of all shapes and sizes, from phone exchanges to hospitals and schools. Also in her role as head of the ACA, she's had a very close engagement with the New South Wales government in drafting, designing and implementing the two new major laws affecting building, the Design and Building Practitioners Act and the Residential Apartment Buildings Compliance and Enforcement Powers legislation. And last but not least, the man that's brought us all here today, Travis Waller. Now, Travis is not just an academic, he's a real engineer, and he's head of the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UNSW. At UNSW, he's previously the Deputy Dean of Research in the faculty, and he's also been the founding director of the Centre for Integrated Transport Innovation. We're lucky to have Travis here today. He's considered a global research leader, particularly in the domain of transportation networks, and he's published more than 300 peer-reviewed papers. So Travis, I'll start with you. You recently published a paper on ethics, which really kick-started today's discussion. Now, the conversation reproduced a discussion in this paper, and they titled it, "Why We Need Engineers Who Study Ethics as Much as Maths." Can you start us off today by telling us, as an engineer yourself, what does that actually mean?
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for that. I'm very privileged to have coordinating this, very much a team effort. And I think at this point, the entire school is engaged. I'm very appreciative of that. One of the core concepts really is that more and more of what engineers and construction professionals and really all technical professionals, much of the work that we're doing is increasingly replaced by technology. And this has been demonstrated throughout history, and it's accelerating. So drawings, designs, planning, pretty much large groups of technical work. And we still need to know that technical work, but we have to also address this role of technology. So for instance, it's been estimated that by 2034, automation will replace 25% of our current construction workforce and augment a further 30%. And so that's a reality that we have to deal with. And I think that's one of the key messages here. None of this messaging is intended to be a criticism of any sort. It's not about the past. And for us, within university anyway, it's not even necessarily about the present, but about the very near and emerging future. What do we need to do to align to that future? Because the digital can't do everything for us. It can't answer the fundamental ethical questions. Should I do this project at all? Am I overcommitted? Is this environmentally sustainable? Is my team diverse? These fundamental ethical questions will be long-term a core skill set for us. I like to make analogies into, for instance, the medical field. Like with medicine, eventually ethical decision-making might be, along with our technical capability, our core skill set that every engineer and professional and construction professional needs to be able to bring into every project.
So, Travis, just for the layperson out there, when we talk about ethical decision-making, what does that look like and feel like on a project? What type of things would that be?
It's asking, is this the right thing to do? Is this being implemented in the proper way? It is following codes of conduct, but something we stress is that codes of conduct aren't necessarily sufficient. You need deep technical skills combined with this deep understanding of being able to justify if something's ethical or not. And one of the points we often like to stress is we argue that this is a massive asset for firms. What's a global trend is that firms increasingly are being required to justify that their activities are appropriate to broader society. And so firms into the future will increasingly need engineers who are able to forge technically based narratives that what they are doing is good for society and demonstrate it from hard science and engineering. So those skills are going to be needed across industry.
Thanks, Travis. So, Michael, as another practitioner out there in industry and one who works particularly closely with financiers, developers and builders, how do you see the future of construction changing and the role of ethics coming to the fore?
It's a superb question. First, I'd like to thank for the opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel. It's a privilege and a responsibility I don't take lightly, especially when I have the opportunity to discuss our industry and the current state and future directions. Quite a few months ago, I was sitting with a very good client and builder and developer, a very good builder, I must add. And he said, Michael, somewhere along the line, we lost our consciousness. And this it made me think about what he's saying. And it was so true, because I estimate in the last 15 to 20 years, we have lost our direction. I think I called it, I describe it as being morally ambiguous in what we're doing in this industry. And as a result, we lost the trust of our end user. And this is disastrous. This has been.
I think we've lost. Oh, you're back.
Literally, we have to from scratch. So we have to rebuild this trust with the end user. So we are reviving at the moment. We're rebuilding this trust because we often talk about the brand, and we need to build this brand, and we need to protect this brand, and we need to move it and keep moving it for people to look at it and say, wow, this is what we want. This is the brand we want. This is the biggest investment that we're going to have in all our lives. And we trust these people for that investment. And it's not a joke anymore. An average unit is over $1 million in Sydney. And if we're not doing the right thing, it's a major issue for all of us. So we need, the question is difference. Yes, the difference is we're going to try and focus on the expectations of the end user. And this is a very important goal for all of us. So in a nutshell, all these guys that were cutting corners, all these players that were taking shortcuts and hoping that things will be right, and somehow they will make money and move to the next project. These people will be gone. There will be no room at all for them in our industry, and this is the best news for all of us. This is best news for the 60 or 70% of superb builders and developers that we still have in our industry. And I think that's the Office of the Building Commissioner estimate that, yes, there's around 60 to 70% very good, very trustworthy builders and developers.
Thank you, Michael. I think you make a really strong point there that this is all about the customer. And I think that's where the industry has lost its focus, that we're constructing buildings, we're designing buildings, we're engineering buildings for someone to live in, to reside in. And I know when government put our office, the Building Commissioner and I, within the Department of Customer Service, it was done for that reason, to make sure that we put the interests of the customer, that end user, front and centre. Now, Aggie, turning to you, we also have change coming through the new legislation. So that's twofold, new powers for the regulator, but also a very new now mandated process for the construction of Class 2 buildings. As someone who's worked closely with pulling those reforms together, how do you see they'll affect the way that designers and engineers and builders work on projects?
Well, can I start with this, that how I understand what digital ethics is? It has been hugely well summarized by Professor Rafael Kapurov from the Stuttgart University in Germany, who said that digital ethics is the field of study concerned with the way technology shaping and will shape our political, social, and moral existence. And I think that's pretty important. Some good news for you, Travis. I had a look at it, and the Ipsos MORI Veracity Index of 2020 said that the engineers are the third most trusted profession. So there's something to live up to. Anyway, the Design and Building Practitioner Act is aimed to overhaul the building and construction industry to restore public confidence and ensure quality and safety of the outcomes, which the other two speakers also talk about. And so as architects, we always have the duty of care, and the new Design and Build Practitioner requires the duty of care to be part and parcel of our work. It requires accountability via the regulated design. What is regulated design? The regulated design means the documentation complies with the BCA and relevant Australian standards. Previously, and because of the pressure, and like Michael was saying, that we've lost control, the architects also lost control, and the drawings have been issued without a proper documentation. And with the regulated designs, this cannot happen. The drawings will have to be documented to the last smallest detail, uploaded, and will have to be, like, pretty much, the regulated means that it will have to comply with all the regulations. This has many advantages. Like, one of the advantages, which I haven't thought of before, was that, say there is a fire in a building which is 5, 6, 7 years old, and the firemen have to get to the site. He can just log on, have a look at the drawings, and in 2 minutes he will know exactly where the fire hydrants are. He'll go there, and that's it, end of fire. So it becomes a very easy access to check the drawings, and it becomes, if there is any problems in the building later on, that it's quite easy to find out where the problems are, because the regulated design is uploaded, then everybody will have, or everybody who needs to will have access to it to have a look. So also all of the people involved, there is a 10-year duty of care, which is unfortunate, but it's retrospective as well for 10 years. But from now on, we know that it's for 10 years, and I agree, that's fine. That's what it should be.
Yes, I guess, Aggie, that means we, as an industry, we can no longer have this short-term mindset on, it's the cheapest, quickest solution, the design solution, the construction solution, the engineering solution. It has to be the right one. And what you're saying there, now that's a responsibility which falls on everyone. It's the entire, all of the players across the board have to focus their attention on that. Otherwise, there'll be serious consequences.
Yes.
So look, that's a very New South Wales centric view of the world. And look, it's important to recognise that we're just a drop in the ocean when it comes to global construction.
Yeah.
I think global construction's worth around $12 trillion. New South Wales, we're somewhere around 190 billion, or less than 1%. So a real drop in the ocean. So Travis, is what we're talking about here with ethics and focusing on the quality of construction, is that just something that's happening in our own backyard? What's the rest of the world doing?
Things can often feel new and localized to all of us, but I think there's one absolutely clear evidence-based reality, and that these concepts are global and economy-wide, and not even just to construction. If you look at what's going on around the world in terms of data privacy, the ethics of AI, surveillance, and so on, the general global economic-wide reality trend into the future is about ethics. All professionals, all technical work, everything is increasingly about that. And so ethics and taking a long-term view is the new normal. It absolutely is the reality. And for those that may think otherwise, that's lagging the reality. And that will only accelerate into the future. So it will only be getting harder to come into harmony with that reality and that trend. And so those of us in education, we're updating our curriculum. Those practicing, we're updating everything we do and the way we evaluate everything. And the only thing constant at this point is change. And this trend is accelerating, and it's accelerating rapidly.
Thanks, Travis. So got a question here from our audience, which I'll try and pick up as we go. And I think this is one that's really important to answer. So how do we make sure that ethics is more than window dressing, that people are actually doing the right thing, regularly, and not just, having a code of ethics out there?
Look, if you don't mind, I think everything that the Office of the Building Commissioner is doing exactly that. As simple as this. People say, look, we can self-regulate, industries can self-regulate. No. Yes, the basis of everything we do, most people have their conscience back on. Most people want to do things ethically and want to try the right thing. But I think what the regulations that the New South Wales government and the Office of the Building Commissioner are doing are making sure that these are not just window dressing. They are measured, and I think we'll talk very soon about the ratings of developers and ratings of builders and ratings of all players. So these are not, they're just very serious methods or methodologies or applications to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing. And it is as simple as that, the answer to that question.
Can I just put in something?
Yeah, please do, Aggie.
So I think that ethics is not just for them, for the customer or for the outside world. It's also for you internally. You have to internalize it. So like if you're doing a design, you have to look at it, if it's ethical or not ethical, even from the point of view, like disturbing something existing, or you're upsetting some natives or native plantations or whatever. So you have to do it for yourself, not for other people. It has to be for you. And if people will find out that you're thinking on the correct lines and you're looking after the environment and everything else, you get a good reputation, and that will become your brand. So suddenly people will say, that architect is doing the right thing, she's thinking of everything around her, not just, it's not for, it's for your own satisfaction, which is extremely important to do the right thing.
Maybe if I just quickly add, agree with all of those, absolutely. If it comes to now very practical, and I think this is a lot of the hard work, is how to go practical steps, and that's something we've been thinking about a lot, and we've not solved it. I think all of us as professionals have to solve this problem, and it will continue to evolve into the future. But there's a few very straightforward things. The first one that we've been able to identify in the literature, first is just frequency. How often do we literally say the word ethics and talk about it? And if we find that a lot of time goes by and we've not mentioned it at all, that's probably a red flag. So one of it is just talking about it like we are here and now today more frequently. Another is within projects, within analysis, being sure that time is literally allocated for deliberation. That's the other. When people, one of the most dangerous phrases outside of a very safe research environment is move fast, break things. You have to have time for deliberation and reflection, and you have to be talking about it frequently.
Yeah, and I think that's great points from everyone here, that ethics is more just objective or a bit of paper. What really matters is what happens in the project. And so people have got to make sure they're implementing it, because that's not just the right thing to do, it's what the legislation requires. And as Michael, it's what customers require. And as Michael was alluding to, which I think we're going to touch on later, it's actually what the market itself is going to require as initiatives like ratings start to become the norm. So Michael, if I could turn to you, as a quantity surveyor, costs and finances are really up your street. So what would you say to those who feel that this transformation and focus on quality and doing the right thing and building better buildings is just going to add more costs into the system? Because that's commonly what we hear in response to something like this.
In my opinion, for the builders and developers who have been doing the right thing, the additional cost is zero. It's nothing, because the majority of our developers and builders have been doing the right thing, and they've been focusing on doing the right thing first, perfectly the first time, not having to go back and fix anything or go back and redo things, which cost a lot of money. So for these people, the actual cost is nothing, absolutely nothing. Their design documentation were always perfect. Their documentation, they weren't relying on construction certificate drawings to build buildings. They were spending time and money and effort to prepare construction documentation, detailed, going through everything, making sure nothing clashes, no drawings clash with other drawings, no services clash with architectural other services. For this big bunch of developers and builders, the actual cost, additional cost, is zero. Now, unfortunately, for the people who have to step up and become part of that club, if you like, yes, there will be additional costs. And these, depending on where you're sitting in that bottom of the list, so it could mean, I don't know, it could mean anything between 10 and 20 or 25% additional costs onto what you used to try and get away with in the past. But then eventually, you see, in the long run, in the short term, it's a bit of an additional cost. But in the long term, you're creating something that we're just talking about. You're creating the brand. You're creating a business for the long term, not for the short term. You're creating trust in your potential clients. So if you put that against the short term additional costs, the advantage is dramatic. It's too much. It's way above what can. So yeah, I mean, we often talk about cutting corners and having to go back to fix something. And imagine if you have to go back and fix something when people are already occupying these units or these buildings. The cost is huge. So yeah, in a nutshell, we need to, it's going to cost a little bit for these guys to step up and become part of that higher rating that's coming up soon next year.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is, yeah, Aggie, I'd like you to have a response here too, because I think you've been seeing it from the designer's perspective.
Well, I 100% agree with you. I think that maybe it costs a bit more, the documentation. Actually, not maybe, for sure it costs more, the documentation, because you have to produce a lot more drawings. You're not relying just on a basic design and then let the builder make a decision, but you do a proper detailed documentation, which costs more to pay for the architect. But when you are out on the site, it costs less because you already documented it the right way to do it. So doing it right way or the wrong way, it's just as expensive. But David Chandler can tell us that how many bathrooms he had to open up and have to redo them because they did not meet the basic standards. And I think that that's pretty important, that you do the legwork at the beginning and not at the end. At the end, Michael, how complicated it is to redo it. If you do it right in the first place, then it's money well spent, I think.
Yeah, look, you mentioned the audits, Aggie. I think our rule of thumb analysis on the cost is that $1 spent during construction becomes around $7 when it's a rectification project.
Easy. Absolutely.
So that's that's the benchmark I think we've found through bathrooms and other work easily.
Not to mention the items that we can't quantify. You see, we do obviously, as expert witnesses, myself and a few of people in my business, the court cases, the cost of courts, the cost of legal advice, the cost of consultants, additional consultants on the other side. If you like, enclaves between the two consultants to try and resolve matters. The negativity, the energy that goes for no reason, and the time that takes, and the heartache, it is unbelievable. It is ridiculous. It is something that no money, you can't place money on the cost of health for people who go through these sort of things, or owners who have to go through this. And mind you, lawyers are very smart. They'll make sure it goes through years and years and years before a decision is made or a solution is decided between the parties. So yes, let's do the right thing from day one.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. I think when we talked about what should be the objective of the industry going forward, we've mentioned previously it's about trustworthy buildings, and so we've put out there that that's buildings that don't hurt people, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but as you're just describing, when there is a problem, it does hurt people. It hurts them financially, it hurts them emotionally. It can ruin marriages and families and all sorts of things.
Absolutely.
So we can't forget the human element to this, particularly because it is ultimately someone's home. It's meant to provide them with shelter.
Yeah.
So there was some data released by Procore not that long ago around rework costs, and they estimated that the cost of rework in Australia was something around 12%, and the international average was closer to around 5%. So Travis, I wanted to put it to you, how would an ethical business approach its culture and processes to make sure it's on the right side of those metrics?
Taking the long-term view. So they'd value the outcome of what they're producing. They would deliberate. And I think a key thing that really should be stressed, I think across, again, industries, across the economy, individuals, professionals want to do the right thing. I think the challenge of this is, in a market environment, which are highly efficient, and I don't disbelieve in markets, you should be able to do the right thing, have a long-term view, and still be profitable. If everyone is required to do the right thing, you can do it in the right way and be profitable. That the problem arises when some may be able to get away with doing it improperly, and that then undermines the entire playing field. And so that requires, though, a systematic treatment and a realignment of culture within any particular industry, any typical location. And if the standards rise across the board and people take a long-term sustainable view, then profit and reasonable delivery are not in competition with one another. You can deliver if everyone's required to do so. And one way of achieving that culture, I had mentioned earlier, medical analogies. If we think of within the medical field, how much ethics and respect is given when a medical professional is dealing with one human body. And the idea that someone can enter the market and do that in a way that's inappropriate is unthinkable. They would be sued out of existence for mistreating a human body. But this infrastructure around us houses many, many hundreds or thousands or millions of human bodies, and we have to treat that with the same respect that we would treat an individual human.
Travis, do you think it's something for the next generation interested in? Is it something?
Absolutely. And being at university, I think seeing some of the early waves of that coming through, absolutely. They are championing these causes big times. In other domains, resource sector, you've seen employees, rank and file staff signing petitions and refusing to work at certain firms. And again, a broader economic trend is getting in line with this emerging focus, or the next generation will displace you.
And I think it's important we think about the next generation because in New South Wales, the data tells us that we've got an aging workforce of around 300,000 or so people involved in our industry. The data says that in the next 5 to 10 years, around 100,000 of those will need to be replaced, that will have retired or moved on. So, you know, we do need to be thinking about the next generation because they're currently already in primary school. They're already out there in the wilderness. Michael, you teach at University of Western Sydney. Is this something ethics? Is this something you're seeing being valued by students coming through the ranks as well?
Look, absolutely. I haven't taught for a while, but I used to. I used to teach at TAFE and Western Sydney University, and at the moment I'm on the external advisory committee, and I look after, I assist as much as I can, and we have quite a few of these students working for us. So we try and give back a little bit, and we're always recruiting from the students. Yes, absolutely. Travis mentioned something very important. He mentioned culture. And I think this is what most students are looking for. They're looking for the culture. And I've always said that culture starts from the top. So it's like a top-down situation where the top of the pyramid, the boss of each company, his culture is, you will rarely see any employee or student or otherwise that remains with the firm if there's a culture crash. So these students are more knowledgeable at the moment. They're very focused. The age we're in is the age of knowledge, an age of openness. You get kids who know more than possibly myself at this stage, because there's so much out there and so much knowledge and so much openness to everything with social media and the right. So what I'm seeing is, especially the students that we are employing, is the focus on moving into a company that has this culture of yes, the code of conduct is there, but we need to do more, and we need to look at the boss. We need to do at all the middle management and the lower management, and try and see how they think and act and react, and it is, yeah, it's how to behave. Like students, we often teach. You see, I often say, I'd like you to come to work for us, but I want you to forget about everything else, and I want you to be a sponge, and I want you to learn again. What are we learning? At university, they teach you how to act and react, and how to do. With us, you just start learning again, and you're reacting to situations. Are we reacting ethically? Are we doing the right thing? Is my boss doing the right thing? Is that something that I want to do if I was in charge of this company? These are the questions that we're getting from students who are becoming much more focused on whereas in my days when I went to uni, ethics was just a course that we did in the final year, and we just, you could pass it. Nowadays, I think, I have a feeling, and it's not a scientific answer, but it's more entrenched in what they're feeling and what they're looking forward to. And now with the advent of that rating system, these students would love to go out and work with, we used to call it tier 1, tier 2, especially students going to work with major builders. It would be a great focus for most students, especially the good students, to go and work for a tier 1 company, for example. Now they have the opportunity to look at all tier companies, but with the rating that is going to come next year, and work within that culture and create that culture and assist with that culture.
What I'm thinking is, like, Travis, you are there, right there, teaching your students. And what I'm thinking is, that teaching the students to do the work, it's all right, like they all have to do it. But to do it ethically, that's the difficult thing. And I'm sure that's where you are obviously concentrating and trying to do it hard. And when you mentioned that Marco was working with the University of Western Sydney, the Association of Consulting Architects, together with the Building Commissioner's Office, they've run a survey of the digital capabilities of architectural firms, because we're talking about the digital age. And surprisingly, the digital capabilities are very low. Now, they're even lower in the small practices like mine, because we don't have the finances to upgrade and time to learn the new things. But but the new systems like the BIM systems and whatever, they're going to help a huge amount to do it correctly, the work, because you'll be able to in one picture see the whole lot, you know, the coordination. So they will be able to do the work, but the ethics will have to come from you.
Thanks, again. I've got a copy of that report here. For anyone listening, it's the Digitalisation of Construction report, which was a survey of all builders and designers across New South Wales working in Class 2 buildings. And like Aggie said, it told us that our industry has low levels of digital maturity. Most designers are working in 2D CAD systems, and the more advanced technology like 3D modelling and BIM is some 5 to 10 years away.
That's right.
And some key barriers being, one, the shape of our industry. It is small business. So it's harder for them to invest in training and education. Also, these products are quite expensive. So the license fees and the ability to change providers is not great. So for anyone interested in learning more, that Aggie's mentioned, yeah, go online, have a look for this report. We can post a link. So Michael, back to you on ratings. So this is going to be it's an independent assessment. It's currently voluntary. It's being run by a regulated rating service, Equifax. We envisage that over time, more ratings agencies like Moody's, etc., will start to come on board. What type of things do you think it will lead to for the industry? You know, where do you think that ratings will actually end up being applied in the market and by consumers?
Again, just from experience, I think the beauty about rating is, and you know, as quantity surveyors, we represent banks on many jobs. Yeah, so a lot of our work is representing banks and monitoring projects, and and also as project managers, we always looked at time and cost, and everybody's focus was always being time and cost. And now, as we regained our consciousness, we added performance in the middle. So we have to perform. So everybody has to perform. So bring the performance in, put it between the time and cost, and balance everything, and make sure everything is, the end result is perfect. With the rating system, I think these elements will be adhered to, obviously. The banks will be looking at things possibly, you know, one would think if I was looking at a project where a highly graded builder is on, banks look at risks, and they look at every element of each deal, and they allocate a certain risk to it. If you have a good builder, the risk is down. So one would assume the interest rate will be down. The conditions will be lesser impact. It's probably happening as we speak, because, you know, if you have a tier 1 building company, the banks will look at it differently than looking at the tier 3, but the tiering is a little bit different, and I think that's probably another discussion. But if we go to the system that is, you know, the Equifax rating system, and the banks will look at it and say, wow, I think this is a 5-star, for example, noting that 5 is the better quality or the higher quality builder. Wow, there you go. That's half. If we look at the developer, and developer is a 5 rating, wow, here you go. That's a huge element of the of the risk that we're so interest rate, restrictions, conditions, precedent requirements will be down. And I'm looking at the banks as one angle, and that's obviously that I mean, it's happening as we speak. But what else? I mean, insurance companies, you know, but if I was an insurance company, I will have a much lower premium for a highly rated builder and a highly rated developer and a highly, you know, because I know, you know. So these are the sort of things I'm foreseeing now, as from my experience. Again, it's not a
And no doubt, the builders and developers that have ratings, you know, if we say that they're at a 5, and those that get a 3 or more, they'll start publishing those ratings on their marketing materials, so that the customers looking to buy off the plan they can actually have an eye to these ratings as well and say, look, this is a player that's not just got a brand, but it's actually got an independent assessment of their reliability behind it. You'd imagine that's quite powerful too.
Wow, absolutely.
So Aggie, you run a relatively small practice. So, you know, as we're saying, that's 80% of the New South Wales design industry. How do you see ethics creating a value in a small business? You know,
Well, first of all, it becomes like your own brand name. The people will realize that the way you approach the design, the way you communicate with the client. I found that it has happened several times that I have seen that the people come back. The architect accepts the project and they promise things that are undeliverable. And then halfway through the project, the client runs out of money. And there you go. Like for me, it cannot happen. I'd rather lose the commission and tell the client, I said, look, for you to build this new house is going to cost you $2 million. If you only have $1 million, don't do it. And you learn this through your experiences, and I've also had some failings. But so first of all, you have to be ethical. You have to look at it when you do a design. You have to look at it like who was the previous architect on the project to start off with. Ask them, talk to the people, find out the smallest details, find out the budget, make sure that you work to the budget. You go and see one of these quantity surveyors like Marco, who will give you an idea that how much it should cost, so that you, and basically, you know, you make sure that the building is environmentally sustainable, because you don't want the client to have to pay too much money for electricity, for air conditioning, or other things. So and then your reputation will spread, and people will come and say, "Oh, I worked with this architect and had such good ideas." Because and the good ideas don't have to mean that you have to downgrade your design. You can experiment with new products, new materials, and new construction ideas, but you know, you have to stay within a certain limit and understand. You cannot do it unless you really understand what you are doing. I mean, this whole design and build practitioners act started with the Sheargold-Gill report to do with the Glenfield Towers, which was a disaster. Right, and that this whole idea started from there, and
so moving on to education then. So I've had a couple of questions online, and I encourage people to keep sending them through. We'll keep using them for this discussion. So Travis, one of the questions is, how do we use technology to better educate people about ethics? I mean, as the Office of the Building Commissioner, we've established a learning management system, which I know Aggie has definitely used, because it's required to be used by people that have been registered under the new Design and Building Practitioners framework. But what role do you see as ethics to help get the message out there and embed this in you know, students and practitioners?
Absolutely. And I think within the educational sector, we have to continually up our game as well. What we've found is there's actually multifaceted. One is obviously creating an ever increasing culture and mindset of ethics, because it's more important in the future. Critically, though, I think one message as professionals, you know, engineers and all professionals, we have to continually return to is the reality, and this is just a fact of history, is that professions are given a license to operate by society because of our ethics, not actually primarily our technical capability. Now, our technical capability is very, very important, but as professionals, it's actually the ethics, which is why we can operate. And it's understanding that it's not just following a code of conduct. That's an absolute necessity. And so, but it's much more. It's even much more than that. It's you're able to approach an entirely new problem and analyze it from an ethical lens. And one thing that we've realized is appreciating ethics as a body of scientific knowledge. So in the paper that we had put out from the school, something which shocks some people is, you know, just a simple little search. If you go into Google Scholar and you look up papers by keyword, you find there are over 5 million papers on mathematics, 5 million. And there's 3.26 million on artificial intelligence. There's 4.66 million papers on ethics. Ethics is actually a very complex, rich scientific field. They have analyzed the reality that there is no one true perfect ethics. Ethics won't necessarily tell every single person to do the exact same thing. You can argue many different viewpoints, and something I joke about, but it's true, but put it in a joking way, is ethics won't tell you what to do, but it will tell you many, many, many things not to do. So it excludes a lot of bad outcomes, but you can still argue about what the right thing is. And that's why different firms, different people, different professionals might take a different approach, and that's okay. So approaching ethics as a rich scientific field that as engineers, we need to learn, potentially in the future, at some point in the future, as deep as mathematics. And we don't teach it to that level of depth. Eventually, one day we might.
Thanks, Travis. Aki, one from our group here. What role do you see digital systems playing in quality assurance? Are they going to replace all of us?
It will not replace us, but one of the things that we haven't talked about was, which I know that David is very keen on, and I have to agree with him, is the digital future and prefabrication, right? Like when we're using the computers to be able to prefabricate buildings, which will be hugely sustainable, because when you walk on the building site, you see a lot of offcuts and rubbish and whatever. So if we can work that the design can be converted, digitalized and prefabricate in the factory and deliver on site ready-made panels, that would be hugely sustainable. And I think that's where I would like to head, to be able to work in that field. Not that I want to be working so many more years, but whatever there is, that I think that's like a pretty important future for our designs. I don't know how the other panels members see it, but
yeah, Michael or Travis?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. There is, I'm a big fan of prefabricated buildings, and there's a lot of quality assurance matters that can be resolved if things are fabricated in a controlled environment. And this is a beautiful field. It's a huge field. It's the way of the future. We can think about it as a 3D printer, if you like, and this is how things can happen. It is. We don't use it often. We don't use it enough in Australia. We don't have enough advancement in that field. But there's a lot of players starting to emerge in this environment of prefabrication. Think of how it's logic. It's the quality will always be superior. Logistics will have to be addressed, obviously, but this is the way of the future. And I do agree exactly what Aggie just mentioned.
Although I would hasten, Michael, of course, it's the installation that matters. So we know in offsite manufacturing that the manufacturing houses often complain that the designs that they've been provided with from the different practitioners involved can conflict. So they'll have the architectural design, they'll have an engineer's design, and that's handed over to the offsite manufacturing house, and they say, hang on, which design are we working for here? So first we've got to get it right at the design stage for them, and then we've got to make sure that whatever's produced is compliant at the factory, but actually makes it in situ. It can be compliant. It's only as good as the final touch. If that contractor installs it the wrong way around, doesn't follow the test points, hold points, all of that sort of stuff, then offsite manufacturing doesn't get you all of the way there. You still have to, it's the application which matters most.
One thing when you said that the digital will replace the people, and Marco mentioned the modeling, so I'm really feeling for the model makers, because with the 3D printing, you more or less can replace the model makers, because you can do the whole city with 3D printing as a model, and that's pretty amazing.
Okay, sorry guys, but what Matt just mentioned is very important. The methodology doesn't change. I think, and I stand corrected if I am, Churchill said the war is won in the bunker. We're not going to go to war with disabled documents and inadequate documents. So it's the same thing, whether we are in situ or we're building offsite. It is the same thing. We just have to resolve everything on a desk like this. It's much cheaper than going and then trying to fix things on site and breaking things like concrete and other building material.
So we're almost at the conclusion of our panel discussion today. We tried to answer as many questions as we can. To close from each of you, where do you see ethics applied poorly in practice in your specialism? What's one thing that you'd recommend, as a message to your peers in industry that we focus on and try and do better? Starting with you, Aggie.
I've only got one sentence as for the conclusion, which I wrote down for myself, and it's by Albert Camus, a famous author, who said, "A man without ethics is a wild beast loosened up in this world."
A wild beast, very
Loosened up in this world. So that's how important ethics is.
Michael?
This is a chapter on its own. If I want to look at unethical practices with QSs and project managers, whether it's a huge field, you see, if let's assume a project manager is on a job and you have an inferior builder, and a builder puts a price and a developer keeps smashing. I'm just giving one example. And again, I think we can sit down for another 2 hours talking about. And the developer keeps on smashing and removing. And sometimes you remove 5, 10%, 15% of the builder's submission. And then you sign a contract with him and you are a project manager and you are a witness to such disaster that is looming. Is that ethical? These are the questions that we ask ourselves. A builder puts a price. You can't squeeze him. If you want to reduce the contract sum, there is scientific methods. It's called value engineering. It's called redesigning of items. It's called looking at other methods. It's called get the QS early in a piece. Don't get the QS when you finish the design and get your DI approval. There's many situations that can be avoided. But is that ethical to engage a builder and sign a contract with the builder and knowing that the builder is going to go broke halfway or finish the job with so many defects that it's going to be a disaster forever? These are the questions there's so many questions for QSs and architects and engineers and project managers and the rest of us that we have to ask ourselves and start always with the end in mind. What's the end? Is to get a perfect product and work backwards. If the answer, working backwards, is yes, let's sign a contract, do it.
Thank you, Michael. That just makes it so practical and grounded. Now, Travis, to the man that started this conversation, so I think it's only fitting that you end it for us. Some concluding remarks from yourself, please.
Oh, thank you, Matt. And given the phenomenal, practical, grounded answers, let me give you an academic, abstract one. So being a researcher, I'll give you a bit of a researchy, though I think with an eventual practicality. So as a general, my personal opinion is that as we move into the future, these areas where this is an issue will be directly observable through big data. And the telltale sign is accelerating timescales. Any market where decisions are made solely on metrics such as how quickly can you do it and how cheaply, and whoever says they can do it quicker and cheaper will always win the work no matter what, inevitably those will always devolve into an area of poor ethics. Now, one way of dealing with that is increased regulation and enforcement. But, and I think what's great here, an ideal solution is to systemize and include metrics around reputation in the awarding of work. And I think by making that explicit, that long-term reputation is valued, and those who maintain it are more likely to win the work, I think then you get a self-reinforcing system that will perform well. So I think any industry is vulnerable to this dilemma unless we include reputation into the decision-making.
Thank you, Travis. And I think my concluding statement would be, and I think feeding off what all of our fantastic panel members have said today, is that if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, wait and see what the cost will be when you hire an amateur.
Excellent.
Superb.
So thank you very much to Travis, to Aggie, and to Michael, and also to Melody and all of the other the supporting team at UNSW for hosting this today. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion. I know we certainly did. It's a really important topic. It's very much, on point with what we're trying to achieve here in New South Wales. And thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone
much.
again.